MV Sewol. History. Disaster struck the South Korean ferry known as the MV Sewol on April 16, 2014 after an illegal redesign of the vessel was completed in 2012. First, let's get into some background information regarding the ship's history. The ferry's original name was Naminue, and under that name it operated from 1994 to 2012 as a transport ship for passengers and cargo. At the time, it was owned by the Japanese company A-Line Ferry, and they had zero issues with the ship during its service in Japan. On October 8, 2012, the ferry was sold to the Chonghae Jin Marine Company, and that's when the ferry came to be known as the MV Sewol. After its 18 years of service, the ferry was worn out and completely dilapidated, since nothing on board had been repaired before it was purchased. In order to get the ship back to tip-top shape, modifications were completed to the ferry between October 12, 2012 to February 12, 2013. Later, it was found out that the changes were based on an illegal redesign of the vessel, which could have contributed to the sinking of the ship in 2014. The modifications included the addition of 2 decks for passengers, as well as the expansion of the cargo space. Originally, the ship was built to hold 239 tons, but after its redesign, it was then able to carry 6,825 tons of cargo. The passenger limit also increased from 116 people to a total of 956 people, including crew members on board the ship. These changes resulted in the ferry's center of gravity being moved upward by 0.51 meters, and it also led to a left-right imbalance as well. After the vessel was finished, an investigation was completed by the Korean Register of Shipping, KR. They did a number of tests to make sure the ship was sea-ready, including an inclining test. This is performed to determine the boat's light ship weight, stability, and the coordinates of its center of gravity. The ferry was determined to be safe, and it received the ship certification as well as the certification of the prevention of sea pollution in early 2013. Although MV Sewol was certified, the KR had to reduce the maximum cargo limit to 987 tons for safety reasons, and the amount of ballast needed was increased to 1,703 tons to help with the ship's stability. After that, everything seemed to be in order. However, the Korea Shipping Association and the Korea Coast Guard (KSAG) were not informed of the ferry's cargo limit. In a shocking twist, the Board of Audit and Inspection revealed later that the KR's licensing had been based on falsified documents. Further analysis was then completed, and as a result, an additional 37 tons of marble were added to the ferry's gallery room at the bridge deck, which is located on the back of the ship. When the final modifications were completed, legally this time, the ship was ready to hit the open water. On March 15, 2013, Sewol began its first operation. Every week from then on, the vessel completed 3 round trips from Incheon to Jeju, with each one-way voyage being 425 kilometers, taking a total of 13.5 hours to finish. In February of the next year, an interim inspection as well as a periodic inspection from the register was completed, and they were given the all-clear to continue their regularly scheduled routes. Although the register may have glossed over a couple of things because the disaster happened only 2 months later. Would you rather sail around the world or pilot a plane flying around the world? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. Disaster strikes, April 2014. On April 15, 2014, Sewol was supposed to leave the Incheon port at about 6:30 p.m. However, a dense fog had rolled in, restricting the crew's visibility to less than 1 kilometer. Only an hour before they were set to depart, the Incheon Vessel Traffic Service (VTS) issued a low visibility warning, consequently halting Sewol's departure time. Just a few hours later, about 8:30 p.m., the VTS retracted its warning, and after the weather conditions were checked by the Shipping Association, KCG, and the operator of the Palmito Lighthouse, the restrictions were removed and the ferry was able to leave the port at 9 p.m. that evening. When Sewol set out on its final voyage, there were a total of 33 crew members, 443 passengers, and a whopping 2,142.7 tons of cargo, including 185 cars on board the vessel. Sadly, 325 of the passengers were students from Danwon High School on a field trip, and 5 of them were not of Korean nationality. The ship's captain that day was brought in as a replacement for the regular captain. However, he had over 40 years of experience at sea and had apparently traveled this route many times before. He was 69-year-old Lee Jun-suk and had been hired on with a 1-year contract and a monthly salary of about $2,500. It's important to note that of the 33 crew members that day, 19 of them were only part-time workers and did not have experience aboard this specific ferry. At 7:30 a.m. on April 16th, the ferry's third mate Park Han-kyul and Chu Jun-ki, the helmsman, took over the watch and relieved the previous team. The Sewol at the time was heading at a course of around 165 degrees and a speed of about 20 knots. The ship was operating 2 radar devices, and when it was only a couple of miles from entering the Mengol Channel, Cho was ordered by Park to change from autopilot to manual steering. At a course of 137 degrees, Seawall entered the channel and everything seemed normal. The wind speed was between 4 and 7 meters per second, there were no problems with visibility, and the wave height was only about 0.5 meters. Although the conditions were good, the Mengol Channel has strong underwater currents, which require extreme caution when steering a vessel through it. Seawall was following a frequently used route, and based on a report from the Korean Maritime Safety Tribunal, Park had passed through this channel on multiple occasions while on another ship. The wider areas of this channel contained shallow waters and rock hazards. However, they were not supposed to be in the immediate vicinity of the ferry's usual path. Right before disaster struck, breakfast was being served in the ship's cafeteria, and CCTV footage showed students socializing on the deck. Chua Yun-sun, a surviving passenger of the incident, recalled going up to the deck to smoke just before everything happened. The captain was missing from the bridge at the time of the incident. At 8:46 a.m., under orders from Park, Cho changed the course of the ship from 130 degrees to 140 degrees. According to Park's testimony, she then used the radar to confirm that the course had been changed, and then ordered Cho to change course even further to 145 degrees, which would later have devastating consequences. Unfortunately, the vessel began heavily listing to starboard, which in turn caused the bow to turn to the right. Park then told Cho to turn the wheel to port. And in a flustered voice, Cho said, "The wheel isn't working." Immediately after, the entire ship started listing. The Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries analysis of Seawall's track chart revealed that the Automatic Identification System AIS had stopped collecting data due to a reported power outage on board. And the expert advisory panel, part of the Police Prosecution Joint Investigation Team, said the AIS failure was due to system limitations, but it did not affect the steering of the ship. On this fateful day, Seawall was heavily overloaded, and combined with the steering error, the sharp turn was too much for the ship. The extra cargo was not secured tightly enough, and once the vessel listed 20 degrees into the water, all of that cargo then fell to that side of the ferry, only making matters worse. At this time, the ship's gyroscope began to record angular velocity starting at 15 dps, damage per second, dropping to 14 dps the next second, and reportedly minus 11 dps the following second. The passengers heard a loud bang, and because the cargo had shifted, it greatly contributed to the destabilizing of the vessel. The ship then tilted another 10 degrees into the water. Overall, Seawall was turned about 45 degrees to the right and then rotated an additional 22 degrees for a span of 20 seconds, leading to catastrophic results. The cargo falling to one side of the ship only caused it to further lose its restoring force, and water began flowing into the vessel through the cargo loading bay's side door, as well as the car entrance at the stern. Off-duty helmsman Oh Young-suk was awakened from his slumber when he was thrown against his cabin's port side as a result of the ship's tilt, which was now leaning a total of 30 degrees to port. Captain Lee at the time was still in his private cabin. When he was informed of the incident, he rushed to the bridge in order to take control. Soon after he arrived, the remaining shipmates and helmsmen made their way to the bridge as well to help in any way they could. Shortly after, the ship's engines were turned off by Cho, although it's unclear if this was done by orders from Lee or out of his own volition. The assistant engineer was called to evacuate the engine room, and with the engines off, Seawall was unable to change directions and began to shift even further sideways. Passengers also testified that the lights had gone out on the vessel shortly after the ferry began to list. Announcements to the crew and passengers began broadcasting at around 8:52 a.m., and everyone was told to stay put, since moving around on the sinking ship was dangerous. Communication officer Kang Hae-sung, who was making the announcements, apparently did not consult the manual before he began barking orders, and continued to tell everyone to remain where they were even when water began to flood passenger compartments. Captain Lee allegedly upheld the orders to stay put, even when he himself was leaving the ship. Emergency calls from Seawall's passengers and crew members began flooding the National Emergency Service line and patrol boats, and the helicopters were deployed in order to aid in the rescue mission. Those on board were then ordered to put on life jackets, but were still told to stay in their cabins. At 9:33 a.m., the Vessel Traffic Service VTS told all of the nearby ships that had volunteered to help to drop lifeboats for Seawall's passengers. And at 9:38 a.m., all communications were cut off between the ferry and the VTS. It was reported that only 3 minutes after communications were terminated, 150 to 160 crew and passengers jumped overboard in an attempt to save their own lives. The ship took about 2.5 hours to fully sink. By 11:18 a.m., the stern was fully submerged, and by 1:03 p.m., Seawall was no longer visible and was completely under the water. As a result of the ship capsizing, there were a total of 299 deaths from those on board, as well as 2 rescue divers and 5 emergency workers. Salvage operations. Seawall was not salvaged until March of 2017. The Shanghai Salvage Company, a Chinese consortium, was contracted by the Korean government to carry out the operation. Nearly 40 meters below the water, the ship was lying on its port side. All of the ferry's cabins were sealed shut, and oil and diesel were drained so as not to contaminate the area further. Massive fences were then constructed around the vessel to prevent any of the wreckage from floating away. A crane able to carry the weight of the ship was used to lift the bow of the seawall 5 degrees, and then 33 lifting beams were placed underneath it. A salvage crew pumped water out from inside the vessel's ballast tanks and then attached airbags to greatly increase the buoyancy of the ferry. ALE, a UK company specializing in heavy lifting and transport, were also utilized in the complex operation in the East China Sea. When it was pulled from the water using multiple self-propelled modular transporters (SPMT), the ship weighed a record-breaking 17,000 tons. The salvage operation was followed on-site by the Korean government as well as the families of the victims, which put extra pressure on the ALE team in charge of the mission. Before the ferry was moved, it was only estimated to weigh around 11,000 to 13,000 tons. However, it was basically impossible to confirm the exact weight until it was lifted out of the water and positioned onto the giant barge to bring it back to shore. Cables attached to lifting beams and strand jacks slowly lifted the ship to 13 meters below the surface, and it was then connected to the barge. Seawall was towed and then carefully loaded onto a semi-submersible vessel before it was transported back to shore using SPMTs, where ALE was able to unload the ship. A significant amount of mud was still inside the ferry, which increased the overall weight of the vessel by 4,000 tons. As a result, ALE had to re-engineer a loadout solution with their site engineering team. Because of this, the amount of axles used in the operation increased from 456 to 600 axle lines at very short notice. Due to the unpredictable deformations of the cargo, the extreme damages to the ferry's superstructures and hull, as well as the ship's transport position, the transporting phase was extremely challenging for the ALE team. However, a careful and accurate shimming tuning phase prior to the load transfer allowed ALE to perform the load-in operation successfully. At the time of the salvage, there were still 9 passengers unaccounted for. The team on site retrieved the remains of teacher Go Chang-suk, as well as Dongwon High School students Lee Yong-suk, Hye Da-yoon, and Cho Yun-hwa. However, 5 years after the initial sinking of the ship, only partial remains were found, and DNA testing was used in order to identify them. Search operations were completed on October 19, 2018, and 5 victims are still missing today.
10. Space debris. With more and more space missions taking place, such as satellite launches and sending astronauts to the International Space Station, more and more debris is ending up in orbit around the Earth. And sometimes it finds its way back down to our planet. Among the collection of rusting metal hunks in the middle of Aerospace Corp's courtyard are items such as a 150-pound motor casing from a Delta II rocket that landed in the deserts of Riyadh in 2001, and a massive 600-pound fuel tank from the same type of rocket that fell in a farmer's field in Texas in 1997. Aerospace Corp collects this space debris in order to study it and find out the best way to deal with our solar system littering. This is important work. Not only can the metal garbage cause severe damage when it crashes down, but it can also crash into satellites. Very often, smaller items burn up in the atmosphere, but the larger items provide extremely useful information. For example, it can help us to design future spacecraft to minimize debris. Although these items might seem cool, if one ends up in your backyard, you'd be wise not to keep it as a souvenir. Anything that falls from space like this is the property of the Air Force. 9. Fish. In Mexico in 2017, the town of Tampico experienced far from your typical rain shower. People were going about their Tuesday morning when it began to pour. Out of nowhere, there was the sound of something slapping into the ground from the sky. Those who investigated and those that were nearby could not believe their eyes, with one onlooker even managing to record the strange event on video. What had crashed to the ground were countless silver-scaled fish. Although they weren't all that large, it was something that no one in the town had seen before. You might have heard the saying, "It's raining cats and dogs," but it turns out that other animals are more likely to fall from the sky. But why did it end up raining fish? Surprisingly, this sort of thing has happened before. Scientists believe that the cause lies in heavy winds being able to pick up small fish, whipping them up into the clouds to be rained down elsewhere. Some places even see it as a blessing. In a town in Honduras, far from the coast, raining fish is rather common. In fact, it's even celebrated as an annual festival by the people. When it comes to the town of Tampico, though, the matter has been met with some concern by the Director of Civil Protection for the area, Pedro Granados. It's not that the fish were in any way harmful, but it could be a warning sign of what's to come as a result of climate change. 8. Frogs. In 2005, residents of the town of Odzaki in the north of Serbia noticed storm clouds forming as the wind started to pick up. However, rain wasn't the only thing pouring from the sky, it was also raining frogs. Amazingly, although they'd fallen from quite a height, a lot of the frogs survived and hopped about the town, looking for ponds and other water sources to get themselves comfy in. The frogs had traveled quite a long distance, as they were different from the local species that lived in the area. Many could not believe it. After all, raining frogs sounds more like something from the Bible than something that would happen in real life. However, the occurrence isn't actually all that strange. Climatologist Slavica Ignatovic was able to give an explanation for the event, stating that a wind resembling a tornado can suck in anything light enough from the surface or shallow water. Usually, it's just dust, but sometimes also larger objects. After their long journey, we hope the new arrivals in town were able to get along well with their neighbors, despite their surprise appearance. 7. Golf balls. One night in 1969 in Punta Gorda, Florida, it started to rain. But it wasn't just drops of water falling from above, it was raining golf balls. People were extremely confused and no one had any explanation for the strange phenomena. The golf ball rain wasn't exactly on a small scale either. They littered the gutters and were in such numbers that after a while the policemen got tired of collecting them and just gave up. Local policeman Lieutenant Clarence Walter and his colleagues carried out investigations at the local country clubs to see if there was any connection, but no balls had gone missing, and those that were on site were meant to be there. It didn't seem like they were a result of an enthusiastic golfer on the driving range. To this day, over 50 years later, there's still no explanation. How do you think it happened? Do you think it was some sort of prank by a local, or perhaps it truly was a freak weather event? Let us know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. 6. Money. There are some rain showers that you really don't want an umbrella for, especially when it's raining money, like it did in Kuwait, Dubai in 2015. It was February 11th and people going about their business noticed paper falling from the sky. Picking it up, they realized it was money. People frantically began snatching up the cash as if they were in some sort of game show, some even running into traffic to collect it. Once the shower was over, almost $817,000 worth of currency had fallen in the area. The curious thing was that the money that fell was United Arab Emirates dirham and not in the local Kuwaiti dinar. Either way, it was worth picking up, as each note was worth 500 AED, or the equivalent of around $136. To this day, we don't know who or what was responsible for this strange event, as no one's come forward to say that the money was theirs. Was it some sort of publicity stunt, or maybe a freak accident? Whatever the case, there were plenty of Kuwait people that were happy to be out in the weather that day. 5. The Great Kentucky Meat Shower. In March of 1876, in the town of Olympia Springs, Kentucky, meat poured down from the sky. The wife of Alan Crouch was outside making soap when what she believed was chunks of beef started to fall around her like blood-red snowflakes. The next day, the matter was investigated further by Harrison Gill. Granted, by this time the raw meat had been left outside where it had fallen, so it was past the point of eating. But that didn't stop two men from turning up at the property and trying some. Although we don't know their names, they said that the mystery meat rain tasted as if it was venison or mutton. Although the way in which they fell was remarked to be like snowflakes, the pieces of meat weren't all that small. Some were as big as 1.5 square inches, but most were around half of that size. Over the years that followed, many explanations were given as to why the meat fell from the sky. One scientist, Leopold Brandeis, hypothesized that it wasn't even meat at all, and that it was a bacteria that jellified like meat when it rained. It was a clear sky though, so this theory was easily debunked. Other scientists who had samples of the mystery meat found it to be either from a human baby or a horse, and to be mainly cartilage. The man who's likely to be the closest to the truth is Dr. L.D. Kastenbein. After burning the meat and finding out it smelled like rancid mutton, Kastenbein concluded that the meat shower was most likely the joint effort of a few vultures projectile vomiting. Gross. 4. Candy. In Lake County, California in 1857, it was reported by the people that during the nights of the 2nd and 11th September, sugar began to fall from the sky. The sugar was in small clumps around 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch in length and resembled hard or boiled candy. Due to the shapes that the substance fell in, it was even remarked to look like goose feathers. Normally, you might question why sugar was falling around you, but the citizens of Lake County seemed to make the most of the situation. Historical reports of the time mentioned the ladies of the town collecting the strange rainfall and making syrup from it. We suppose it brings a whole new meaning to the phrase, when life gives you lemons, or in this case, when the weather gives you candy. 3. Spiders. In Santo Antonio de Platina in Brazil, a local captured a video of countless spiders all hanging down from long, thin webs, looking like they were cascading down on the people below. Ironically enough, the guy that took the video, Eric Rice, is a web designer himself. Although the video went viral, a rain of spiders like this is actually more common than you might think. Apparently, the type of spiders that were featured in the video are pretty social, and as a result will often hang out, quite literally, in large groups like this. However, that's not the only reason why they might have all been in this particular area at this time. Biologist Marta Fisher gave an explanation. She said it's not an unusual sight to see a sky speckled by spiders. The species Anolosimus eximius can be found from Panama to Argentina and lives in large colonies, sometimes comprising thousands of individuals. Each spider is around 1 inch in size, and its colonies can number in the thousands. They can create webs all the way from the ground to locations up to 65 feet high, and sometimes, if the wind is strong enough, it can whisk away this large community web, sending it flying through the air to a new location. We don't know about you, but the thought of thousands of spiders all flying through the air together is terrifying to think about. It's likely that this is what happened in Santo Antonio de Platina, and the reason for the long strings of spiders is that they were trying to make it back up into the trees for safety after their aerial journey. 2. Coffee creamer. If you lived in the town of Chester in South Carolina in 1969, all you need to do was step outside of your house with your mug of coffee in the morning to get some creamer. If you were vegan, it was okay too, as the creamer was non-dairy. The reason why the town of Chester received this gift from the skies lies in the fact that they lived near a Borden Company factory that was manufacturing one of their products, Cremora. Cremora was a non-dairy creamer that came in powdered form. This powder ended up clogging the exhaust ducts in the factory, resulting in some of the product billowing out into the air. When this mixed with dew, moisture, and rain from the weather, it provided all the liquid the powder needed to turn into creamer goop to rain down on the town below. Now, that would be nice if it landed directly into your hot cup of coffee. It's not so nice when it doesn't land there, for example, all over the roads and sidewalks. Understandably, the Borden Company ended up facing legal action over the creamer showers and had to pay $4,000 in damages for causing the weird weather event. 1. A cow. In 1997, a crew of Japanese fishermen were clinging to the wreckage of their fishing boat, awaiting rescue in the Japanese Sea. They were picked up by a vessel after a few hours of floating in the waves, but they were placed under arrest almost immediately by the authorities. The reason why, one of them explained what had happened to cause their boat to sink. A cow had fallen from the sky, crashing right through the middle of the ship and causing it to capsize almost immediately. The weird thing was that every single one of the crewmates told the exact same story. The fishermen were detained for weeks until some officials from the Russian Air Force made contact. They sounded a little bit sheepish when they explained that the Japanese fishermen had been telling the truth. Apparently, the crew of a Russian cargo plane had noticed a cow wandering near their airfield out in the cold wastes of Siberia. They had decided the best course of action was to steal the cow, stowing it on board the plane in the cargo hold. For what reason, we don't actually know. Perhaps they fancied steak when they got home, or a glass of milk for the flight. The cow didn't take too kindly to being airborne and started to panic, trampling and stampeding around the cargo bay. This caused chaos for the people on board, but also for the pilot, who was having a hard time keeping the plane stable. In order to make sure the plane did not crash, the Russians needed to get rid of their bovine passenger, and so they chunked it out of the hold at an altitude of 30,000 feet over the Japanese sea. You don't need to be a scientist to work out where the cow landed. Thankfully, the Japanese fishermen were released, but it was certainly the biggest and most dangerous catch of their lives. 4. Mysterious shipwreck of Epinomi. In the winter of 1970, a ship sank off the coast of Epinomi in Greece during the time that the regime of the Colonels, a military dictatorship, ruled over the country. The vessel had been transporting soil out to sea in order to profit off the location's unique habitat of natural beauty. At the time, many species of fauna called this place their home, as well as roughly 2,500 plants and flowers. However, this was all about to be sacrificed so that they could create fertile land where the people living in the area could grow crops. Although natives were hesitant about destroying such a thriving ecosystem. Then, as if by the grace of God himself, the ship carrying the oil encountered a problem when they ran into the sandbank. The crew that had been on the vessel chose to abandon it there in the water, where it's been rusting in the crystal clear blue water ever since. Residents of that area have long believed that Agios Antonios, known as the father of monks, had saved the habitat. Apparently, the shipwreck occurred on the same day as the feast day of Agios Antonios, which happens every year on January 17th, according to the Greek Orthodox Church, who celebrates it. This man also went by the name of Saint Anthony, and he was born in the year 251 AD in Egypt. He was brought up in a very religious household, and his parents had passed away when he was very young. He was extremely devoted to God and the gospel, so when he heard the words from Matthew 19:12, "If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell what thou hast and give it to the poor," he did exactly that. He immediately went out and gave everything he owned to the poor, and then retreated into seclusion in the desert. For the majority of his life, he did all he could do in order to uphold righteousness and help those in need. His passion and virtuous deeds caught the eye of many people, who then followed him to the desert and transformed the barren land into a holy city, which was later called Coma. Saint Anthony served the inhabitants of this new metropolis as their lawgiver, governor, and master trainer. Christians who were being persecuted and killed by the hands of Maximinus in the year 312 AD were aided by Saint Anthony, and when the Arians began causing trouble for the church, he traveled to Alexandria in the name of orthodoxy in 335 AD. Many people who did not believe in Christ were persuaded to change their ways by the grace of his words during this time as well. He decided to live outside his village for a period of 20 years, where he's said to have dwelt in solitude under the roof of an abandoned fortress where he studied the ways of the ascetics. He perfected himself in the virtues of holy men and practiced unceasing prayer, extreme fasting, and conflict with his inner demons. When St. Anthony finally did leave his desert dwelling 2 decades later, he was described as being filled with God's Spirit. After living a life of pure righteousness and virtue, the monk passed away peacefully on January 17, 356 AD at 105 years old. This is why they hold the feast day of Agios Antonios on this day, and why the natives of Epinomi believe he had something to do with the sinking of the ship off the coast. If this is true, the saint saved millions of species that day, and has since turned this incredible shipwreck into the tourist destination it is today. Nowadays, hundreds of people flock to this beach so they can relax on the sand, swim in the clear waters surrounding the wreck, or snorkel around the rusting ship. For those who believe that the holy monk saved the ecosystem that exists in these waters, it may even be a sort of religious experience seeing part of the ship peak just above the waters. 3. Church of Hagia Theodora. Just outside the city of Vasta, a popular tourist destination considered to be a place with holy connections, lies just a couple of miles outside the town of Megalopolis, which is located in the Arcadia region in the Peloponnese. An ancient Byzantine church known as the Church of Hagia Theodora resides here, with a total of 17 trees completely taking over the structure. This church dates back to the 12th century, and the branches of these trees can be seen poking out of the roof of the building. However, without explanation, there's only one root that's visible just beside the entrance, and it's about the thickness of an arm. Typically, a tree has many roots, some that grow near the surface of the ground to absorb rainwater, and then usually there's also a layer of deeper roots in case it encounters dry conditions at the surface. It doesn't make sense that one root could be providing enough sustenance for 17 trees at once, but yet this is exactly what's happening here. Experts have tried for years to understand this strange phenomena, but it was difficult to come up with a plausible reason for this occurrence. Some of these trees are as tall as 98 feet, and it seems completely impossible given that they only have the one root to deliver nutrients up their enormous branches. Even more fascinating is that the ancient church's barrel-vaulted interior shows no sign of the trees or any roots, which is mysterious because you can clearly see the plants growing out of the roof from the outside. Yet inside, there's no indication of them. This is why many Greek natives flock here every year on September 11th, which is now known as Hagia Theodora's feast day. The story behind Hagia Theodora is an interesting one. She's said to have lived on the Peloponnesus in Greece during the 10th century in a town called Vasta. The area she called home was once raided by a group of bandits, and she was determined to help defend her people's village. However, Theodora was a woman, and at the time, it was unthinkable for the gentler sex to participate in such activities as battle. And so, the strong-willed Theodora came up with a plan. She didn't want anyone to stop her, so she disguised herself as a man, much like the story of Mulan, and joined in the village's defense as a soldier. Her intentions were pure, but sadly to utter these words: "Let my body become a church, my hair a forest of trees, and my blood a spring to water them." The people of Theodora's village were so moved by her bravery and untimely death that they constructed a church right on top of her grave in order to honor her. Miraculously, over time, a local river changed its natural flow path to pass directly underneath the church. And just like Theodora declared, trees began to sprout from the church's roof. If this story is true, it could explain the strange rootless tree phenomena that scientists have desperately been trying to figure out. However, it seems that a more reasonable explanation was discovered in 2003 that proved just once and for all what was happening at this mysterious religious place. In Greece, at the 4th Symposium of Archaeometry, a geophysical report was brought to light regarding the secrets of the trees growing from the roof of the Hagia Theodora church. The results of this report showed evidence that the roots were following the already existing gaps inside the stone walls of the chapel. This then causes repulsion stresses within the stones, which allow the roots to reach the ground. Even though the mystery of this ancient church has been solved, it's a miracle that it's still standing under the immense amount of pressure and weight from the trees on top of the structure. After hundreds of years, this chapel survives, and there's been no damage done to the building or the trees that grow from its roof. Maybe the spirit of Theodora still resides within the walls of the church and protects it from being destroyed. If you could transform into any structure, animal, or thing of nature when you die, what would you want to be? Let us know in the comments below, and remember to hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying the video so far. 2. Mount Taygetus Pyramid. In South Greece, located on the Peloponnese Peninsula, is the Taygetus mountain range. With an elevation of 7,890 feet, the tallest mountain of the range is Mount Taygetus, which is also known as Prophet Elias. The whole mountain range measures about 62 miles, and it extends from the middle of Peloponnese all the way to Cape Matapan, which is its southernmost extremity. Interestingly, the name of this mountain is considered to be one of the oldest ever recorded in Europe, and it even makes an appearance in the ancient Greek epic poem The Odyssey. According to classical mythology, the name is thought to be associated with the nymph Taygete, who's believed to be one of the 7 sister nymph companions of the goddess of the hunt, Artemis. This place in Greece has a long history and contains many mysterious secrets that scientists are still trying to figure out. This mountain range has always been inhabited since at least Mycenaean times, the Bronze Age in ancient Greece, dating back to 1750 BC. Near the village of Arna, which is located on the eastern slopes of the Taygetus mountain range at the site of Archina, 3 beehive tombs were discovered, but have not yet been explored. To the Spartans, Taygetus was an important natural defense. It is said that they tossed criminals down into a chasm of the mountain range, known as Kaidas. Evidence of adult remains were recently discovered by the University of Athens at the bottom of this chasm, which further proves that this place was once the location where Spartans would punish criminals, captives, and traitors. And while there are many intriguing facts and legends about this particular mountain range, the most bizarre theory lies at the highest point of Mount Taygetus. The peak of this mountain is strangely similar to that of the pyramids of Egypt. Due to this unique phenomena, many people flock here to see if they're able to distinguish whether this is man-made or if it's a natural occurrence. There are some who claim that there's a well-placed stone cone on Mount Taygetus, shaped like a giant lid to create the triangular shape. However, many oppose this theory and insist that this is nothing but a natural rock formation. We may never know the real truth behind this theory, but there's still more than meets the eye to this place. At just the right time of day, a pyramid-shaped shadow is cast by the peak of this mountain that bathes the land in darkness below it. This perfectly pointed shadow leads many extremists to question whether or not Mount Taygetus has extraterrestrial origins. As you may know, there are many theories regarding the placement of other pyramids around the world, one stating that the 3 most prominent Giza pyramids directly align with the constellation of Orion. Based on this, perhaps there could be more secrets waiting to be uncovered here. We just haven't figured them out yet. 1. The Asclepion at Epidaurus. One truly mysterious and ancient place in Greece is the Asclepion at Epidaurus, which dates back to around 600 BC. This is one of the biggest healing temples that has survived through the ages and is still standing today. Most of the structure is carved out of stone and is made up of a ground floor fitted with rows of primitive columns. There's also an underground basement that was seemingly chipped out of the rock below it. The walls are covered in a red-colored plaster, and the floor is one of the best preserved examples of a pebble mosaic that was commonly used during this era. However, one of the most prominent features of this sanctuary is the theater that's located on the southeast end of the temple. The theater is still in use today and is an absolute wonder of acoustics. However, this spot was once used as a medical sanctuary, and people with serious illnesses and diseases were treated here. Ancient people from all around the eastern Mediterranean region would gather here to seek cures for their various ailments. Although the healing techniques they used here were very unorthodox, and it's unlikely that these methods would be recreated today. It is believed that in order to receive treatment, a person would have to sleep in the temple overnight and allow many snakes to slither over their body as they slept. This particular practice is almost laughable by today's standards, but thousands of years ago, this was the epitome of excellent medical healing. Nowadays, contemporary scholars have the chance to travel here in order to study some of the ancient diseases that plagued people from that time period. Strangely, when someone would come here for treatment, they would have a local sculptor turn their afflicted body part into a figure, which would later be dedicated to the temple. Archaeologists are now using the remnants of these sculptures to map out the diseases of these ancient people. Back then, the Asclepion in Epidaurus was a huge resort that had various guest houses, a stadium, a gymnasium, and the impressive famous theater which was used to elevate the soul. Along with its many extravagant facilities, this place offered gorgeous, peaceful, natural surroundings that positively bloom with lush vegetation and jaw-dropping views of the surrounding mountaintops. This location is a destination that one simply must visit if they're ever traveling to Greece. Perhaps it's possible that they could be healed at this ancient place from the many damaging and overwhelming afflictions that we now face in the modern world on a day-to-day basis. Would you rather explore an underwater shipwreck or visit the site of an ancient healing temple? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for another amazing video. Bye!